Stef, who's going to be talking about the 30th birthday of the cookie. You remember where you were 30 years ago? I was studying accountancy. So it was definitely not a time that I feel so. It was. And Stef has been working in places like the Chelsea Football Club, BBC World, and also for the Commissioner in the UK. That's enough of this today, and I'm going to pass the baton to Stef. It's yours.
Okay, thank you. Evening. Thanks for coming on tonight. I appreciate this. Let's take you through cookies. Cookies and the ethics and the use of cookies and how we've not totally got things right, in my opinion. Where it says, my name's Stef Elliott. I currently live in Nottingham. I moved to Nottingham when I moved there with Experian, and I often use this slide to try and highlight this because I often feel some of the stuff that I do, I work as a data steward. I look at data and as a data engineer and what people are doing. And so the loneliness of the long distance runner hits home with me because Alan Stiletto is a Nottingham writer, and it sort of sums me up slightly. I sometimes feel that that's me. When I'm trying to speak to people about the use of data, how they utilise data, how they're using it effectively, you know, I'm a poor Nottingham teenager trying to avoid crime. And so just wanted to take you through, data is a 4-letter word. And what do I mean by that? Data is often misunderstood. People use the phrase, there's lots of phrases used in this space which are very confusing. And so what I'm going to talk to you about first is what I call jingle jangle. The jingle jangle of privacy and data protection, what different people mean by consent, how jingle jangle has come to overtake cookies and some of the issues that we have with them. So what do I mean by jingle and what do I mean by jangle? Well, jingle is the same word, has different meanings. So if I said bat to you, you could think, well, actually, there's a fruit bat. It could be a table tennis bat. It could be a cricket bat or a baseball bat. It's got different meanings. But then jangle is when the same thing has many phrases for it, but it means the same thing. So I don't know if you knew this. When I went up to Nottingham, you might sense from my accent, I'm not from Nottingham. I was born in London, grew up in London. So when I went up there and I said I wanted a bacon sarnie, they looked at me and said, what's a sarnie? It's a bacon cob up in Nottingham. Some places it's a stotty. It's got different phrases across the UK. And so you've got different variations of, it represents the same word. I said this because we're going to go through some phrases where you might have different perceptions of it, and I'll try to explain it as we go through. So if you see something that comes up about jingle jangle and the jingle jangle alert, I'll try and explain it and try and be more specific in some of the phraseology. I'm just going to take you through 3 stages of compliance. I work in compliance, and since things such as GDPR's come in, lots of people work in this space. But there are only 3 stages of compliance. Or you could say, why Sisyphus, patron saint of data protection and data privacy experts? Because what you have is most people start off where they're actually unconsciously incompetent. They're not sure about law. They're not sure about what they need to do. And they're in that state. Suddenly you move from that state to being aware. Just in terms of, we are sharing the slides. So if people do want to have the slides, you can do. They go to this conscious incompetence where they actually know that they know the law, but they've not actually put anything in place. And we're going to take you through some examples where people are in this second stage. And then you finally move to this conscious competence because people come up to me and they say, Stef, are we GDPR compliant? I say, no, you never will be. It's a principles-based law. Technology changes. You can strive to be GDPR compliant, but there's no black or white in a lot of this. It's making sure you're moving on the right direction. I put this up because this is cookies. And I put this up because this is the bane of my life. I think since 30 years ago, we've cheapened the phrase of cookies. We use cookies, that's the phrase, and we say, oh, it's the cookie monster, or we use it as biscuits. And it sort of belittles the phrase. It reduces the impact or the risks that cookies potentially can have and what they mean to businesses. And so I'm not going to talk about that. I think sometimes what we do is we try to hide behind it, saying, well, actually, I don't fully understand it, so let's put the cookie monster up. And I think it's important that as a profession, we ethically look at this and say, what are the things that happen that cause problems? And so if you have a look at it, what is a cookie? It's just a text file. It's a text file of numbers. That's all a cookie is. The key thing to understand with cookies is that how do they come about? 12th of March 1989, Tim Berners-Lee came up with this piece of documentation, which was effectively you could call it the precursor to what is called the World Wide Web today, effectively how hypertext works. And what happened was that, I don't know if you remember this cartoon, this is 1993. On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. That was apt. That was true at the time because there was no such thing as a cookie. The cookie didn't exist. And what happened was a gentleman called Lou Montelli invented the cookie in 1994. And he set that up because what he was doing was he was working for a telephone organization who wanted to have state on the internet. The internet is stateless without cookies. And so what you have is, for example, if Maria, I'm going to use you as an example. You come to me, I'm an internet site. Maria, what's your name?
Maria.
That comes back to me without cookies. I wouldn't know that. So I'd ask the same question every time we have an interaction. Maria, what's your name?
Maria.
Maria, what's your name? It's getting a bit boring, isn't it? You can see the point there, that you've got no concept of memory. And that's all that the cookies provide you with. And what happened he was working at an organization, but Netscape actually introduced this in version 0.9 of their web browser in 13th of October. That's when cookies came about. What happened was there's a lot of discussion about cookies, about the privacy impacts of that. And so looking at where we are in Europe and in the UK, in 2002, we had Privacy and Electronics Communication Regulation that came out. That was appended in 2009. And what happened from that is that there was a lot of discussion. It was due to be impacted across European countries on May 2011. And you would notice that it's actually a directive. It's not a regulation. And a directive in Europe means that each of the countries had to apply it in their own local law. So it's not like the regulation that came out, which is across every state. Each of the different states applied it in slightly different ways. And the International Chamber of Commerce came up with a document. I'm not sure whether I'm more embarrassed being a QPR fan that I did some work for Chelsea, or the fact that I was actually involved in some of this, pulling this documentation together to actually look at cookies. A gentleman called Robert, name escapes me. Come back to it. Did most of the writing. But what you've then got is that we then introduced the law in 2011. Effectively, the ICO came out, said that you have to introduce this by May, 25th of May 2012, and put that information into place. So that came out, and then what we had is 25th of May 2018, GDPR came out. And part of this comes down to the fact that a lot of this documentation was talking about the fact that you had to get consent for cookies. And then what happened with GDPR is it actually had a definition for consent, which was slightly more strict than the original documentation. And 2019, the ICO came out with some latest guidance, and it's still up to date on their website. So you can download that information. It talks about cookies. Where are we going? That's the big question. Regulation in terms of what's coming out. There was talk in 2018 that we were going to introduce an e-privacy regulation, but that's stalled. It's going backwards and forwards. So we're sort of caught in this where we are today. I don't know how many people work in web development. Apologies if you do. I'm just going to run quickly through websites and what they do. and how they provide this capability, because it's quite important to understand the constituents. Websites are built from 3 types of code. There's effectively the HTML that says what it says. You've got the CSS, cascading style sheets, which shows you how it looks, the design, the fonts, the colors. And then you've got the JavaScript, which is effectively how it operates, how it interacts. Once the DOM is established in terms of loading a website, this is how it actually interacts and moves things around. So if I give you a quick example, here's a website. It's only got a title. It's got a little bit of text. That would be made up of this information. So you've effectively got various bits of code, HTML, end of the HTML box, the header, the body, and the footer. And that's providing that sort of information. That's showing how that presents. You'll notice that you've also got here, this is the CSS, and this is the JavaScript. Now, they can appear in the document, but they can also appear externally. And that's where the issues come about with cookies and the management of cookies. So, cookies. Get my first problem of the day. I talked about my dog. Internet, no one knows it's a dog. Here's my dog. And these are his cookies. These are the cookies that my dog has now. And what's come about is that cookie basics is that what happens is that somebody goes onto a website. Sam goes onto a website, it goes to a server. The server has got the memory of a goldfish without cookies. And so what happens here is that Sam's not actually known as Sam on the website. He's known as C1R1. That's his cookie. That's the cookie that's on his machine. And what that means is that the server can actually recognize that. It's C1R1. It can recognize that and it can therefore have that conversation. And so you've maintained the state within the cookie basis. Susan goes on, and Susan's never been on the website before. So Susan hasn't got a cookie. She's got no cookie that's been set. She goes onto the website. The website notices that she hasn't got a cookie. It goes to my next prop. Anyone recognize these? From the deli counter? Insert one off. Gives you a number. Records it. That's your number. Your number is now stored. It writes the cookie to your device, and therefore it's there so that when it comes back, it remembers you. And you've got the option of cookies, how you write them. It doesn't recognize her as Susan. She's C1R2. This is actually from another presentation. These people actually come from the original Guess Who game. The reason I use them is that I use this to demonstrate that using a relational database, you don't actually need a name to identify somebody. That's column 1, row 1, column 1, row 2. So what you have is that they're the different types of setup of a website. So the question with cookies, are they nice or are they evil?
These are.
Yeah. I've got some here as well, actually. And I've got some training packs which I'm going to give out, which are the no expense spent training pack.
You do get the option of managing them, don't you, on a lot of websites?
You do, and I'll explain where that doesn't work as well as it should do. So there's some real life. So this comes down to it. Cookies aren't actually bad. Cookies are a means to an end. They're a purpose. You use them for a purpose. And that's where you determine whether they're nice or evil. They provide memory. That's all they do. It's what they provide memory for is the key piece of information that you've got to be aware of. And I often use this phrase in order to. If you work in data and somebody says, yeah, we're doing this, use the in order to. In order to do something, what you have to do. There's a purpose. So, for example, in order to get here on time, you had to get a train or a tube to get here. That was your means. Your purpose was to get here on time. That's the scenario. You use another in order to in terms of accelerators. What's an accelerator? In order to make the car go faster, the driver, I'm using a bit of GDPR technology here, phraseology, the vehicle controller, because that's who they are. They're in control, or they're meant to be in control of the vehicle. They actually push on the accelerator when the engine is running. And the purpose is to make it go faster, you push on the accelerator. I was invited by Northumberland Police to present, well, I thought it was to present, but it was to attend a special course called a speed awareness course. And the speed awareness course was not because I'd been doing accelerator manipulation, it was because I'd driven too fast. I'd used the accelerator to do that, but it was ultimately that. So that's where cookies come from in order to, and it's important to understand that. Cookies. Are they personal data?
No.
No? Yes? It depends. This is definition of personal data under GDPR. If you have a look at this, it looks at anything in terms of reference to an identifier to utilise to identify or distinguish an individual. And so to be personal data, there's got to be one of three things happen. There's got to be a specific content element of that cookie. There's got to be a purpose element of that cookie, or there's got to be a results element that comes about from utilising that cookie. That determines whether they're personal data. So if you go onto a website, for example, and you choose the screen colour you want, if the cookie records it as green or yellow, that's not personal data. It's providing you with service for that, as long as you're utilising that just to provide that piece of functionality. If you start recording someone's preference on a database, then it starts becoming personal data. You no longer see a cookie like that. You're not going to see a cookie with information in a text file, which is personal data. But what you will see is something called pseudonymized data. And so what you'll have here is that the cookie, Susan's cookie, well, it's not actually Susan's because I've linked it into somebody else, but it actually links into some personal data. So therefore, the outcome means that you can actually identify the individual, and therefore it's personal data. The first of my jingle jangle tags. A jingle jangle, what's a tag? A tag is, most websites are built up of tags. A tag is just a piece of code. It's a box of code. If you have a look at like Lego bricks, each of the different components of a website is made up of little parts of code that then interacts to produce the final product that people see when they go onto the website. Now, some of that is presented at front of the screen, some of it is behind the scenes that helps things with such as search engine optimization, but also to look at some of the reporting. And whilst I work in data, but I also work with marketers, and marketers are all, our website is unique, we're fantastic, it's a fantastic user experience. Most websites are actually like the Swiss Army knife. They've got basic functionality. They might have different colors to do that, but they've got different components that provide different functionality. And the way that that's provided is through tags. Effectively, what you've got is you've got different functionality, whether that be things such as the images that appear, the maps, the forms, the widgets, or you've got things that provide set functionality that are provided via tags. Little bits of code, the Lego bits that are built together. And if you have a look at it, all websites are made up of three components. They're either built, they're bought, or they're borrowed. So built is that you build it in-house. You maintain the code yourself. You look at that and you've got different components of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then you've got the bought and the borrowed, which comes about from you go and get something from a library, or you get a piece of kit that then integrates into your website. You might have something like an email sign up. You usually do that through an email service provider. I put built, bought, and borrowed because the alliteration, but realistically, these are leased. Often the borrowed things are leased because what you're doing is you're getting a piece of functionality and you're giving something back to the provider of the functionality. To come back to your point, we'll go into some of this in terms of the cookies that are set and the purposes of what they provide. This is an example of the online advertising space and the different functionality that's provided across this by different tags, different providers. Another scary thing about this today is from 2013. This was what was happening in 2013. And increasingly, there are a lot more providers of these services moving forward. Your website is a patchwork quilt. That's what I'm trying to say. It's a patchwork quilt made up of different components. And your patchwork quilt of code is often made up from different servers. My dad, bless him, when he goes to a website, thinks there's one server or there's one site. He doesn't fully understand it, but it's provided. If he goes on to the co-op website, he thinks, oh, it's just the co-op are providing this, and they're providing it from a co-op server. That's not often the case. You've often got a variety of different servers that are providing functionality to make up a website. And those servers themselves can be picking other servers, taking data from other servers. So what you've effectively got is you've got a whole load of capability where they can provide HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And JavaScript is where you write the cookies. And so any of these, unless you set your website up correctly, can write cookies and utilize the cookies that are on the website. Depends how you set your site up. And the key thing to understand is, are these cookies nice or are they bad? Example from 2013. This is an example of the data capture by the different components by the different providers. So what you've got down here is the data that people capture, the HTTP header information that's provided, the cookies that are provided, the functionality that's provided by all these different organizations. I don't know if anyone's just recently been onto something, publisher site where they've gone on and it says, to use a cookie, we take your data and we share it with 600.
Yeah.
That's effectively the outcome of this. Because when this came about, and this comes down to whether cookies are personal data or not, the thing was that they said this is anonymous data. And it's not for GDPR. There's a lot of stuff going on in the courts at the moment, which are looking at this. It's a thing called the IAB TCF framework to utilize that information. So another thing, pixels, tags, trackers, or cookies. People often say, what are these? They're just different variations of the same thing. A tag is a block of code. It can contain a pixel. It will set a cookie. It could be a tracker. A pixel is just, it's a picture element. That's the meaning of pixel. It's one by one usually, and what that means is that you put the one by one GIF onto your website. You can't actually see it, but what it means is it makes a connection with a third-party website or a server, and therefore it provides that information. Okay, in terms of tags, what tags are? Your website is just made up of boxes within boxes. And the key thing is to understand is, have you got any horrors in your boxes that you're providing to people? Coming down to websites, key question I think to ask any organization is, have you got a spaghetti bolognese website? You'll see there's an actual theme. I try to use dogs as much as I can because on the internet nobody knows that you're a dog. But this is where you come from. And coming down to your point in terms of cookies, lots of people use cookies, and I'll take you through a training piece that I'll show you in a second. Cookies, they try to answer the solution, but is anyone happy with the cookie banners that they get? Do they understand them?
I understand it, but I'm not happy with them.
Yeah.
That's why I'm not happy with them.
Yeah, that's correct. Effectively, what you've got is that a lot of people use, they don't use tag management. They use a thing called cookie categorization. And when I talk about dogs, cookie categorization is that they try to herd cats. That's what they're trying to do with a lot of their cookie solutions. And we'll take you through some of those examples.
The correct word is obfuscation.
I'm slightly more charitable.
Okay.
I don't think it's potentially deliberate. I think organizations have said this is good enough rather than is it good?
It's lazy.
Yeah, it is. And I think,
or it's deliberate.
I think we've got an environment, this is partly the ethical piece here, is do we think that is the solution good enough? And at the moment we've got to, in my opinion, it's not good enough. But we've let it get to that point where it's accepted, it's not legislated, or it's not policed as well as it could be.
They do give you a warning that it be used for advertising purposes, don't they?
They try to. They try to, but let's go for an example. This is a jingle jangle. I've actually gone through, and this is an example of one of these things that you'll see in terms of your permissions. I've gone through 8 websites. 8 websites looking at their cookies. And across that, they set 38 cookies. Now, this is only across 8. So there is an exemption in terms of if it's essential, but we don't call it essential. It could be necessary. It could be strictly necessary. We're in this jingle jangle phrase. We've got advertising, analytics, functional, marketing. What's the difference between advertising and marketing? What's the difference between analytics? The user base doesn't understand that sort of information. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the next stage is an example of how I almost killed my friend's son and the £2 training kit for cookies. So this is no expense spent training. So in terms of cookies, the best way of doing this, and the analogy which I utilize with cookie banners and cookie categorization, is to use a thing called Smarties. £1.75. Pack of 4 Smarties. Now, what I'm going to do is if I were to give that to Maria, you have a pack there? Sorry, I don't know your name. I won't ask it because we're privacy friendly unless you're willing to give it to me.
Junaid.
So,
Junaid.
Judith. And sorry, your name is Steve. All right. What I'm going to do is give you those. What I want you to do is, I'm going to ask you to do, you don't have to do it, but when I say take the lid off and tip them on the floor, and let's count up what colours they are, who do you think is going to win this? We have to turn them on the floor, come into those categorizations. These are our cookies. Don't actually do it because I've not been told, I've not been given okay. The people who will win it is going to be me. Do you know the reason why? I've counted the cookies in here already. I've said what should go into these cookies. So I've done a proactive piece of work. I've said that I only want so many red ones, I only want so many orange ones. We follow a cookie categorization where we look at, the way cookie categorization works is that people look at their websites, they look at the cookies that arrive, and then they try to categorize them. Sometimes they categorize them by themselves. Sometimes they rely on a third-party provider to categorize them for them. So I'm actually in control of this. How did I almost kill my son's friend? Matthew, or Matt, or Dr. Matt now, is a PhD in physics. He's working in quantum computing. He came around one evening and we served, it was I suppose, a typical Nottingham tapas. We had the full range of things, Pringles, peanuts, pork scratchings. We served that. Dr. Matthew has got a nut allergy. He ate the peanuts. We then had 24 hours where he was in an emergency care in QMC. He was only 5 at the time. He now realizes that he's actually got that in place. We didn't allow for that fact. So if you really want to up the ante on this, rather than use Smarties, I suggest you use M&Ms. And I've actually got a selection of M&Ms in here if you want to take these away. I've only got so many of them. It's got a mixture of those. Do the same thing with Smarties, but you've got peanuts in there because you've got a risk effectively of what's going to happen to you. Because M&Ms, you've only got 6 colours, but you've got the peanut piece in there to give you that added piece of risk. And that's what we do with cookie categorization. So, cookie categorization. This is a cookie categorization tool. What it does is it will go against your website and it will then allocate the cookies to each of these different sections. So you've got necessary preference, statistics, marketing, unclassified. That shows you're in control. That's the potluck category, or the I couldn't be asked to actually do the piece of work that understands the cookie. Or to complete the dog theme and the slang, we haven't got Scoobies, what's going on? So what happens with most cookie categorization is that you've got this, you categorize them by these different components on a retrospective basis. You're not in control. What you're doing is you're responding to the cookies that appear. And the issues with that is that you've got a retrospective report only. You've got limited pages that you potentially run that on. You sometimes only identify new cookies, not expired cookies. You then have to categorize them according to that. And cookies are multi-purpose. It gives some examples of why we and the outputs of where we've got to with not actually doing this job properly, or deciding that it's good enough, it's not good, it's not enough, but it's good enough because everyone else is doing the same and therefore we can get away with it. These are recent reports that have come from the US and also from the UK in terms of cookies and where things have gone on. And you look at these and say, well, actually, is this really that bad? Google in a claim for wiretapping. This one we'll take you through in a second. The Metropolitan Police sharing Facebook pixel data with sexual offence victims going on the website. That was poor cookie categorization, piece of kit that should never have been on that website, but it was. So back to Spaghetti Bolognese website. Have you got Spaghetti Bolognese website? You need tag governance. You need to govern the tags, not just manage them, not just categorize the cookies, because it's only through knowing the ingredients of your Spaghetti Bolognese can you actually tell whether you've got any nuts in there, when potentially there's a cause or a risk for somebody. And I don't want to go too much into the law, but if you're aware of the GDPR, Article 26, data protection by design and default. Every organisation should, that's one of the things they have to do. Ensure that they have actually designed and by default, they have looked at the data protection element, which is things such as data minimization, data for a purpose, making sure that you're not providing data to third parties when you shouldn't be providing data to third parties. And just take you quickly through that. What they have there, this thing called TOMS. TOMS is mentioned quite a lot in the GDPR. It's technical and organizational measures. So that's tag governance. State of the art, cost of implementation. You've got to make sure that state of the art. State of the art is a phrase when I talk about GDPR. It's written in 2016, came in 2018. But it's a forward-thinking legislation. So it says that right in 2016, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but we need to make sure that as things move forward, you maintain the fact that you've got this state of the art. And a lot of businesses set up websites and haven't really maintained the state of the art. I'll run you through something on that in a second. And then finally, you've got here, this has got to be both at the time that you actually determined it and ongoing. In terms of data, and this is, people talk about data is the new oil. Common phrase. Data is misunderstood. Data has got certain laws. It increases with use. Yeah, it does. But what you've also got is that you've got to make sure that you've got accuracy. It increases when you combine it. It does. It depreciates over time. But the key things in terms of personal data are these two. Is that personal data is controlled. It's not owned. You don't own the data. You have access to it, you utilize it for a purpose, and therefore what you're trying to balance. The GDPR is not negative to using personal data. It's trying to balance the rights and freedoms of individuals with the rights of business to make profit. It's trying to get that balance so that you've got the two. And the other thing is it's multi-purpose. Data can mean different things. So for example, if I gave you my email address, I'm expecting that you're utilizing that to send me an email. You could put me onto your email list and start sending me stuff. I've not consented to that. I've not asked for it. You might be able to get away with a little bit of a soft opt-in from the UK, but you're pushing the boundaries. If you were then to sell my data to someone else, that was a definite no-no. I gave you my email address to communicate with me. So, you know, data is multi-purpose.
It's not just sell the data though, is it?
So
It's not just sell the data
No.
to somebody else.
no, it's to utilize the data for
Give it to
commercial
some
benefits. Yeah. I don't know if people use websites, have Google Analytics, and whether they have looked at Google Analytics 4. GA4, it's often used on websites. Google Analytics is set up and it processes, it's just come in it came in 2020, 21, but it's now overtaken what was universal analytics, GA3, and that is being sunsetted of websites. Does that process personal data? It does. Ultimately, this information is that what you've got with cookies, again, is that utilize IP address. IP address would try and identify that, but because people had different IP addresses or would approach websites from proxies, etc., you didn't have that capability. This is a piece of paper from 2012. You have to go onto the web archive to find this. But what you've got here is this is Google's own documentation. It's a unique ID. It identifies the visitor with the original ID. So you might have seen the Google Analytics tracking cookie. What category would you put it into? So the underscore GA cookie is that component that's utilized to track each visitor onto the website. What would you put it into the categories? Would it go under analytics, performance, marketing, strictly necessary? But this is where we come back to this thing that we haven't got this right because we use cookie categorization. If you go to one database, they put it down as a performance cookie. So if they were reporting and they found it on your website, they'd say you've got a performance cookie. You go to another cookie database, it's a statistics. Third one is analytics. So you've got cookie categorization tools that are providing this piece of information. Ultimately, what you've got is it's used to distinguish users, and it depends what you're utilizing it for. I did a presentation for the World Federation of Advertisers, and I explained all this using Google Analytics, Facebook, TikTok, Snap, but I wasn't allowed to use their name. So I had to make up my own social media company. So Eldorado doesn't exist. Eldorado is my own social media company that I've utilized. And what Eldorado does is it does what all the other social media companies do, but it's not a social media company. Their legal team wouldn't let me use a real example. So what happens is that the way that this tag pixel works is that somebody comes onto your site. You have put a piece of code onto your site because you've decided to utilize it for marketing purposes or for capturing information. And what happens is that I have a cookie on there and an event is recorded. It records that event. It's a bit like if you were in a supermarket and you've got a camera looking at what you're doing, over your shoulder at what you're doing. That's effectively what you've got on websites with event tracking. And what you've got is you've got a transport and a payload that provides the information across. And that provides the information layer. So what you've got in Google Analytics is that you've got a cookie. You've signed up for a Google account, you've embedded the code in your site. Now, people might say, well, isn't the deprecation of third-party cookies? This actually sets a first-party cookie. It's a first-party cookie from your site, but it utilizes Google technology. And the way that this works is that it actually links the GA to the individual. It records events that happen on a website. The difference between GA4 and Universal is that Universal used to be set up so that it recorded page loads. So it watched whether you'd gone from one page, say the frequently asked questions, to the book an appointment page. It would provide that sort of information as standard. But what GA does is it captures event data. So it captures event data from the website. So when you do something on the website, it takes information on the website and provides that into the bucket, which is effectively your data reporting. And so what you have is this thing called transport and payload. The transport is that you've got the data, you send it across to Google. The key question is what's in the payload? What is the data that you're providing across? And this is where you get into the dangerous components. So this is the payload that you would get from a page view. So even looking at this at the moment, you've got the page location and the URL. When you have that data, you're providing that page title is provided of what the individual is using. It's got how far you scroll. Think of engagement. Are you engaged with the page? It's got information such as the outbound clicks. Did you click So say, for example, you're on a site for a sensitive charity site. Say it was something such as Alzheimer's, and you were looking at support. If you had this information, you would be capturing that information that person is looking at certain pages on the Alzheimer's site, and they're going to other sites that are providing that information. That's personal data. It's sensitive data, effectively, that you're capturing. Page views, site searches. This is often set up by default within GA4. And a lot of people don't realize they're doing this, and videos you've got as well. Video law is coming out in the US because a lot of people are using this on their sites, and there is a video law from 1988, which restricts you from capturing data regarding somebody's viewing habits and the titles they've served. File downloads, again, things that you're downloading, again with information in there. And also you've got form interactions. I'll take you through some real examples of these, which are quite sensitive. Before I do that though, the other thing with Google Analytics is that Google Analytics, what it does now, is it now integrates with a thing called Google BigQuery. So suddenly you've got the ability to download the granular level data of an individual, of everything they've done, and every event that they've gone through. And you can then utilize that for your own purposes. Traditionally, you could have said, well, actually, Google Universal, you only had access to it through the interface, unless you were you paid a certain fee, then you could download the information. But now anyone can download the data. You can set that up. This is the event data that you've got. This is one line of the data that's captured from Google's own information. So what it does is you've got columns. So for the columns, you've got things such as the events, the users, the device information that's captured. So you're capturing all that information. It's being collected. And I've got this far, and I'm only going to mention it once. And this comes down to, I've not used the AI phrase, but AI is built upon machine learning, or you could call it statistical learning. It utilizes the data it holds. The more data you've got, and the less control of you've got, the less you can understand why your machine learning tools are actually providing the solutions they come up with in their models. Again, the columns, this is each of the different columns. You've got the event timestamp of when somebody does this. You've got the data of the individual. We'll use this in place. So that's GA event data. If you decide that you want to utilize things such as the demographics that Google have, so where somebody might reside, you might want to do a piece of demographics in terms of their age range. You might want to do some Google marketing. You've now linked your cookie data with their cookie data. You joined into a joint controller arrangement, and you're providing that data to Google. And they can utilize it for their own purpose. And they can link it back to that. So, this gives some real examples. This is the Nottinghamshire Police website, where you go on to, if you're unfortunate enough that you feel the need to report a sexual offence. And down the right-hand side, the right-hand side here, these are the different calls that are made to different websites and different servers. And you see the thing down here, this is actually utilizing Universal. This is from July last year. What has happened here is that you're collecting this information. What you've got is a thing called a CID, customer ID. The customer ID, you see, is made up of two numbers. The first one is the GA cookie. The second is the timestamp. So it's the Linux timestamp. So that will take it down to the microsecond of the person when they're visiting the page of when the date's captured. You'll see you're capturing data regarding the fact that I'm on that, sexual offences, I'm reporting rape, sexual assault. It's taking data automatically from the setup of the website. You also see that there's the second piece, another piece of collection. Collection there is, this is linking it into Google's actual data themselves. And if you start looking at this and saying, well, actually, the CID that we had before, same CID, connection of that data. You got the underscore GID, which is the Google ID, same piece of data. You're utilizing the cookie to collect data. You're utilizing the cookie to collect data of a very sensitive nature. And this is where I think when I come back to, I feel that we've lost this, the cookie is dangerous, or we don't treat it with enough respect. People say, oh, it's the cookie monster. It's a nice biscuit. It's what you do with it is where the ethics come into this. I had to explain to my wife why I was looking at this site, purely research purposes. If you go on to the NHS, your online sexual health. The reason I found this is I was doing a piece of work for Nottingham University. Nottingham University provide data up to their students of if you've got concerns, they refer you to this site. If you go onto this site, you have to go into that and you provide information into this in terms of your age, your postcode and your gender. I went in there and said that I was SK95AF. That was my postcode. It's not my postcode. It's actually the postcode of the Information Commissioner, so I thought it was quite funny. And what it does is it says I'm 50 and it gives a variation of my sexual preference. You see in the URL, the way it's been set up, the URL includes that specific data. That is then captured within the information that's provided across to Google. So you're capturing special category data through the utilization of a cookie. How are we doing? It's not all Google. This is an example from the US. Facebook Pixel. The concept of Facebook Pixel is that Facebook offer you the chance to look at the effectiveness of your marketing campaigns and the impact of them. And therefore, they offer you a reporting suite tool that uses Facebook Pixel to provide that to you, but they also use the data for their own purposes. So that's the trade that they give. You get a free piece of kit. You know, I talked about things being borrowed or loaned. That's the piece that you have. And what this does is there's a lot of focus in the US. They've got various different laws in the different states, but this is a health website. And so what this is doing is it's providing information that somebody's gone onto this health site for behavioral health. They've looked at this page. That's their Facebook Pixel. So that is utilized to link back to their Facebook profile. So Facebook can see that they've looked at that. You can go onto this, and this is, they actually click a button to say, I need to get some help. So potentially you're booking an appointment. That captures that data. The cookie is not the problem. The cookie is, are you using it as the accelerator to push things too far? Just in terms of time, just quickly, back to personal data is controlled, not owned. You enable somebody to have access to this data by putting these kits on your site. It's multi-purpose. Do you tell people, are you transparent about it? And it's more than cookies. Cookies are the how that enable the whys. People have got to understand the whys and make sure that they manage those. That is the ethical component of this, making sure it is, and it's enough and you're providing good information. I don't know how many people have, I'll ask this question. How many people have got a cookie policy?
You mean a business policy or a personal policy?
I mean, the business has got a policy regarding the use of cookies. I'm not talking a notice, I'm talking a policy. How long you set cookies for, the purpose that you allow them for. The majority of people don't have a policy. They have a notice which they try to utilize. And so effectively what you should have is that you should have, what the cookie is, when are you setting it for, where are you enabling it to be read, what are you enabling it to do, and ultimately who's able to utilize it. Now these are standard things within HTTP. The majority of people don't set them up. Another example is if you look at things such as charity websites will often have a leave this site quickly button. They don't have a referrer policy that says we can't pass on that piece of information to the site that it goes to. a lot of them go to Google. So Google get the information that you go to that site that you've come from this site. It's providing that data. So just in wrapping up, the key thing is to get what I call tag governance, not cookie categorization. You actually understand the tags that you're setting, you understand what you're doing them for, and you've got an owner for them. You ensure that you've got policies in place, in websites. You train people to understand the risks that are associated with it. It's seldom that you'll have a website which is built in-house. You use vendors. But it's important that you have a due diligence process that ensures that those vendors only set things on certain bases, that they only collect certain data for certain purposes. And you put in place contractual protections to make sure that those tags, they can't utilize the data, to make sure that you've got the right to audit and make sure they've got the obligation to update you if they change their technology and how it utilizes, to make it state of the art. Transparency and consent management, you've got to take it as a serious responsibility to actually inform people correctly. I mean, in terms of cookie notices, I see them, you think, yeah, they haven't done their homework.
Well, they have done their homework.
I think it's like, yes, yeah.
Legitimate interest.
Yeah.
And it's anything but.
Well, yeah, part of that comes down to the LI. There should be a test in place, but often there isn't. And it's usually the answer is legitimate interest, and then we'll do the test rather than let's do the test and find out what we should do. So, in my experience of these sort of things, and tag monitoring, it's important that you actually audit those things. So I'm not saying get rid of your cookie categorization. Utilize it to see what you are utilizing, and if they are doing it, and if they are doing things, go back to them and use your contractual protections. So data is an asset. People say data is the new oil. Data is an asset. It is an asset. It should be used as an asset. But therefore, it's an asset. You should treat it like an asset. And you should understand where your data is, what it's being utilized for. But most people don't utilize it as an asset. Data is also a liability. I prefer the concept of water rather than oil, because water, it can cause damage. Our boiler blew up last year. I tell you what, the amount of water that comes through a ceiling is quite shocking. The amount of damage it does. And ultimately, accountability is making sure that you're protecting people from slipping over on all that water and utilising it. Without tag governance, you've got a leaking bucket. You've got no idea where the water's going. Trust is talked about. You can't make someone trust you. You can be more trustworthy. And that's demonstrated by your cookie notice. It's demonstrated by your tag governance. I'll run through this today. And the caveat I said at the start was I'll give you some information. What you choose to do with it is down to yourselves. You can listen to it. You might have been unaware of this. You might suddenly be in the, yeah, we're aware of the law. We're aware of what we do and we're aware of some of the risks. And you can leave it at that. Still in stage 2. Because ultimately, you can do something about it. Because choosing not to do something about it, you're still responsible if you ignore it. And I think this comes down to the data ethics of organizations, is that organizations have got to be aware of this, look at their cookie banners. Say, is that really fair? Is that really effective? Or have we just got a sticking plaster that's trying to hide something? Because ultimately, it should be pronounced key. It's a key. It's like a match key, a join key. It could be a foreign key within a database, but that's what it provides. And it's important that you understand it. And apologies for this, but this is the best that I could do. You've got to have an acronym. Cookies. The key thing here is that things have moved on. And our cookie knowledge is not state of the art. We've got to move with it. So my request really to anyone here is to look at your cookies, to look at understand what they're doing, to do something with them. If you don't understand, find out more about it. Because cookies are important. If they're used as a barcode to identify somebody for a purpose, it's important that you understand that purpose and you put in place the protections for those individuals, and you choose to respond to that in terms of the lawfulness of how you're processing that data. My name's Stef. I work in this area. As one of my bosses once said, there's only one F in Stef Elliott. I don't think he meant to pronounce my name. I think it was and so thank you very much for listening. Hope that you found that interesting. As I say, I'm quite happy to take questions or open the floor because you've listened to me for 40 minutes, spurting on. Quite happy to hear you guys and take some questions.
You can always- Questions.
Got a question or? Yeah.
Is it both? I heard somewhere where people try to ransom a company by saying, I take the cookie, I checked your cookie, not set right, and it's, caused me a lot of grief, and you're taking all my data without my permission because you haven't set your cookie straight.
Yep.
I can't help you,
Yep.
maybe. Is there a lot of that, or?
I just repeat the question for the people online who might not have heard it. The question relates to people asking organisations
It's like a
scam regarding their cookies, that they don't understand what their cookies are and the fact that they can help them, or they're going to report them to the ICO is the standard one.
Yeah.
Yes, you do get a lot of that. I'm sort of mixed on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I tend to say to my clients, if you understand the cookies you're setting, then this isn't an issue. If you don't understand the cookies that you're setting, then they're technically correct. Now, the chances of them going to the ICO and the ICO investigating it, I suggest are minimal. I wouldn't suggest paying that ransom, but what I would suggest is that you use the money to get yourself in a position that the next time the letter comes, you can say, we know what cookies we set. We've got a cookie notice that provides that, and we fully understand the basis for that.
You fix the problem in effect, yeah.
Yeah, and what it often does is it highlights the fact that people don't actually understand their estate and what's being said there.
Two things. What happens if I clear my cookies and if I choose to browse the internet in incognito mode, does that stop cookies being a problem?
Well, Google have just settled in the US in terms of their incognito mode and the fact that it's still setting cookies on most sites. The thing with cookies and what you tend to have, which a lot of people don't necessarily see, is a phrase called cookie matching. So effectively, your cookie is set at a point of time. You potentially might clear your cookie. You then go back onto a site, you get another cookie. But it can use, companies can utilize things such as device fingerprinting to identify that cookie and then link that cookie back to the original cookie to maintain that. You'll often see that with things such as components of data. So you go onto a website and you're effectively anonymous. You've only got a cookie ID, but then you put in your email address. You then link the email address back to the cookie. You then provide that email address to match with other data sources where they've got your email address. There is a lot of work going on in terms of what's called addressability within marketing. And the main problem is that the way the internet is set up is that a lot of things are free. To fund it, advertising is required to potentially do that. And the advertisers, the model doesn't really work if they're totally honest about the amount of data that's being processed. And I think your point about, is it nefarious? I think there are a number of people who don't do as much work as they should do, because I've had clients who said to me,
Their business model.
Yeah, I've had clients say to me in the past, we would ask for their consent, but if they knew what they were consenting for, they wouldn't let us do it.
It's the difference between picking up a newspaper or a magazine in which you see advertising. Now, there's a degree of targeting in that because they know who their readership are, more or less.
Yeah.
But on a website, you don't get that equivalent anymore. You used to do, but now it's targeted. And I wonder what Max Schrem's view of all of this is.
I think I know maximising is.
Yeah, I do. I know what the view of it is,
Yeah.
yes.
No, but I think what you've got is that you've got contextual advertising that does happen. I think the main issue is that this data is the new oil and data is an asset, is that people have got access to data that realistically they haven't really got a legitimate basis for. The regulation has not caught up with the technology, or the application of the legislation has not got up with technology.
Max Schrems filed 45 minutes after the GDPR came into force. Or was it 48 minutes? I can't quite remember. It was 48 or 45 minutes after, on the 25th of July 2018.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of stuff going through the courts, but if you look at the some of the stuff in terms of things such as the Facebook cases, they go on for a couple of years and still aren't resolved. The IAB TCF is currently been ruled to be personal data, but it's now gone to appeal. There is a certain degree of view that a lot of some of the big tech providers look at the fine as a cost of doing business.
Yeah, that's the missing part of the GDPR.
Personally, I think the GDPR is a really good piece of legislation.
It doesn't have an off switch.
I don't think it's been applied. It's not been
It doesn't have an off switch. That's what gets their attention. But can you comment on different types of browsers? I've switched to Brave recently.
Yeah, Brave is slightly more privacy focused than Google. Google is talking about the deprecation of third-party cookies, but the different browsers provide different capability, but the technology is slightly ahead of the legislation and in terms of the technology itself. So, for example, things such as Google Analytics has moved to a first-party cookie and utilizes that JavaScript library to actually provide that data. A lot of people are moving away from what was traditional advertising identifiers to a thing called clean rooms, and what they're doing there is they're taking what's called first-party data, which is email addresses and things like that, and matching that against other people to expand that data. There's a lot of work that's going on in terms of inferring addressability and the targeting of that. I think to answer your questions directly, I actually use Brave myself.
Search engine's not that great, even when you use Google as a search engine.
No, the whole thing is that it's being aware of what you're doing. But I think one of the things I'm trying to get today is to get people more aware that it's 30 years since the cookie came out. It is GDPR is 6 years old now. We're still utilizing technology, and some people are utilizing it, might be maliciously. I think I like to take people through that Sisyphus piece, because if you don't know, all right, that's your first hit. If you do know and you do it, that's starting to get to where I think people are being negligent or complicit, and that's where you come into ethics. The police site actually took those cookies off until recently, when they put them back on, and they've now subsequently taken them back off. That comes down to not having in place the training to do that, is not learning from what they've done.
On Olivia's point about,
Question.
sorry, go ahead.
How dark is the dark web? First question. And the second one, how safe is blockchain? The way it operates?
I think I wouldn't know how to get onto the dark web.
Oh,
I don't explore it. I look at what is the web at the moment, because my experience is working with businesses, legitimate businesses. I wouldn't go onto the dark web. So I can't answer your question. Blockchain. I think blockchain is a technology that's still got some way to develop. I think there is a requirement for people to understand it, engineers to understand it. I don't think a lot of people do understand it.
don't they do the bit of mixing as you were talking about with different people using it?
Some people use blockchain, but in terms of the cookie concept, it's a different variation.
I was going to pick up on Olivia's point about the people ringing up, contacting companies and saying your cookie policy is no good or not. There's already a firm that does that. The pen testers company, they're a penetration testing company, but they check they call up companies and say, look, you've got a problem with your website, like you are a company, a manufacturer, like the classic one was, there's a company marketing a children's doll, which had a dictionary built into it, which was there to enable children to learn to speak.
Yeah.
But that was updated through HTTP, not HTTPS, which allowed paedophiles to get onto that doll. And so they call these companies up and say, do you know that this is possible? We can show you how to fix it. And they're a very reputable company of pen testers.
Yeah, no, I think pen testing is something you should put in place. I think I think back to the point in terms of the cookie component is that if you don't understand what your website is doing, you are a data controller. That doesn't work with me. Is if you're controlling it and you don't know, you can't be a controller. You're an out of controller. And the whole principle, I have a thing, GDPR and things such as privacy notices, the number of web apps that operate, and they all use SDKs, software developer kits that they don't fully understand. That captures data, but their data privacy policies often refers to the website. Privacy notices aren't structured to the user. Everything else is UX'd out of its beyond control. We've got a long way to go. And my own personal bugbear on this is that we don't teach data protection in universities, and we don't teach data protection on computer courses. So we've got a lot of web designers who are developing websites where, you know, I use the example of the police site. I don't know yet because we're still in discussion with the police on this, but we think they used a template. And so the template they utilised might have been okay if it was, say, a retailer. If it was a men's retailer and I was checking 36 length trousers, there's no real, it's data, but I'm not that fast. When it comes to these sensitive sites, never be anywhere near there. And that where it comes down to the actual designers. Data protection by design and by default is the design piece, is you actually design something. A lot of the time we take the Lego brick or somebody else's Lego brick. We don't fully understand what it's doing. And therefore, I think that's one of the things we come down to the ethics, is that people have got a responsibility to understand this.
I think it's slightly off the point, but what you're saying about companies not knowing, not being aware, it's like companies allowing their staff to use WhatsApp on their company phone, which is not legal. It's not legal. Unless they've gone to all of their contacts on their personal phone and said, "Can I please send all your information to California?"
I think, just to extend that analogy, I think this comes down to business. I got done for speeding. I broke the law. I now still drive, and occasionally I might get caught for doing the law, breaking the law. I'm a lot more aware of that. But I don't drive because I'm worried about getting the penalty. I'm worried about the impact I'm going to have on the person I hit, or that's where I think this is where we come down to ethics. You shouldn't be afraid of the law, because if you're doing something which is ethically correct, the law is a sort of a line you go through. You should be well above the law, and that way you're not going to get into trouble with it.
Question online.
Okay.
This is from
Ashok.
Can cookies be hijacked by a bad actor on a valid financial website to access personal information?
There used to be an ability to do that, but I think financial websites are a lot more aware of that. In terms of the cookie will provide the first component of it, but you go through sort of two-factor authentication, particularly with financial websites. I know there is some discussion in terms of some of the banking sites, again, whether their sites are maintained and up to date. And again, that's down to the point of, are you looking at HTTPS or HTTP? There's a gentleman at the back there. Ah,
I've got a question if I can ask. Where did the word cookie come from? You've obviously tried to come up with your own meaning of it, but is there any substance towards that name?
yeah. It's based on a thing called a super cookie, and it was used by the guys who actually came up with it for providing state between their internal servers. So that's where the name super cookie was utilized for that, and that's where the idea came from.
Okay.
A question from a practical point of view. You were mentioning Google Analytics. This is part of this Lego bricks that we use to build websites. And sometimes we have to be working with somebody else's websites because we are using their service. And they're already using Google Analytics. So it's very difficult for us to do the right thing because they already have configured it in a way. And we are trying to get maybe a minimal part of it.
Yeah.
And we know that it's going to be maybe capturing more information that we would need. We don't even get it as people who are using the service. Somebody else is getting it. And then somebody else is getting it. Which is what you suggest as a solution?
I think the whole thing with data, and this is where I come down to data is water, is that you've got to understand where this is potentially going. You've got to have in place, the whole principle of big data is variety, velocity, and volume. That's three things that come behind it. The thing that should be there is veracity. Have you got a right to have that data? I think it's important that organizations put that piece of work. So some of the stuff that you've seen there, and again, I don't think it's malicious. I think people are unaware of it. The thing I'm not saying the police web, I don't think they should have used Google Analytics linked into the advertising piece, but they potentially could have used Google Analytics. But what they should have done is that they should have done some work to actually hide the data they're passing across. So it's not as common. It doesn't have to say, a lot of this technology, what it does is it picks up pieces on websites. So majority of websites, if you go into things such as search engine optimization, it's going to have reporting sexual offences in the URL because it helps people to find it. But it's a different purpose. So, you can hide that. It could have been, a random number so that you can still see that within your reporting suite. You see how effective it is, but you've actually done that piece of work.
Collecting less.
Yeah.
We have more questions online. Are there other ways of achieving?
The functionality that cookies give without dropping files on the client machine.
Yeah, there are other ways. Some of those are slightly more intrusive. I come back to the cookie is not the problem. The purpose of what you're doing is the problem. So if you are, putting the cookie, it might be because of the way the legislation came about. The cookie, the principle that you consent to cookies. You consent to the fact of somebody dropping cookies. You could argue that without actually understanding what the cookie is doing, you can't consent in the first place. And I think it all comes back to understand the why. Why are you using the piece of functionality? Whether that piece of functionality is to provide fonts and you're using it from a third-party site, they're going to get that information. But have you got the contractual information in place to check that? What is the data you're processing and who has got a right to actually utilize that? And it's not the cookie's fault. I think the cookie is a patsy. The cookie has been held as the bad guy here. It's not the cookie. The cookie's the accelerator. It's the person with their foot on the accelerator that's causing the problem.
This one, Maria.
The next one from EB. This person is keeping his or her identity. How might the development of centralized identifiers, DIDs, impact the future of consent?
It's what is happening is you're getting to the concept of you call centralized identifiers. A centralized identifier in its name is there to identify the person. A lot of people on the internet People think they're the dog, and they want to be the dog. And so a technology solution is not going to solve the problem of addressing, can I legally process this information? Because if you can convince somebody to provide you with their identification, that's how you get over that piece. There's a lot of work going on centralized ID. If you go to the IAB TCF, which is the technology and consent string, what you've got there is that it provides 11 purposes for processing the data. And it's got a couple of things. Now, the big issue is the identification of the individual. That's the piece that, this is where I think it's not Max Schrem's in this, it's Johnny Ryan's piece, this, where he's looking at this and saying, well, is this lawful? The TCF tries to hide the real purpose. The purpose is the identification of the individual. If people want to be identified on websites, then be frank, be open about it. I think the problem is that coming down to the business model is that they haven't worked out the value exchange to provide that.
There is another question from Syed. It'd be great to hear Stef's thoughts on GA4 consent mode very briefly, if possible.
I don't know who said that, but if you saw Jingle Jangle for consent mode is a Google phrase for consent mode. So effectively, it's Google not having consent and therefore wanting to provide reporting that's based upon tracking an individual. So I think it's in place for a purpose, but is it clear? Is it obvious? I would advise my clients to be very cautious before taking it at face value in terms of is it consent.
EB is asking a lot of questions.
What challenges might arise in adoption of more privacy-centric cookies technologies, such as compatibility issues across different browsers and platforms?
I think compatibility issues regarding the cookie is set by the browser itself on the machine. So the actual compatibility between them, there isn't much compatibility because they're different access to the sites. I think the piece that is interesting is that consent, privacy is a different phrase from data protection. It's a wider scope. I think data protection is that you've got to ensure that the data that you're processing through the use of cookies is lawful. You understand what you're trying to do with it. And if you don't understand what you're trying to do with it, you can't have a lawful basis. I think what you'll tend to find is that, back to your point in legitimate interest, people use legitimate interest because of the 6 legal bases that they've got available to them, they can't get consent, and therefore LI is the one that they'll go with.
But when you read what they're putting under legitimate consent, you realise it's just advertising.
Well, the whole principle of legitimate interest is to actually process on the basis of legitimate interest. You should have done what's called a legitimate interest assessment test. Most people won't have done that, or if they've done it, the focus of it has been on the business benefit, not the risks to the rights and freedoms of the data subject.
Tom, thank you. Thank you for attending. Tom is he's mentioning SOLID. It's an emerging standard designed to address some of the privacy problems.
Sorry.
SOLID.
Sorry.
It's a standard. I got rid of.
I'll say another question. Could blockchain technology play in the revolution, the way people are used to track user behavior while anonymity?
Anonymity. There are 3 stages of data. It's either anonymous, it's personal data, or it's anonymized. Now, what you're trying to do is blockchain, can it provide a degree of anonymity? It provides a degree of what we call privacy enhancing. It's not as explicit, it's potentially more controllable, but there's still the purpose there is to identify an individual. There is a lot of discussion currently going on in terms of, again, you heard the phrase PETs, privacy enhancing technology. Privacy enhancing technology has got different capabilities, but what it is trying to do is still enable some of the same practices, not fully respecting some of the law.
Yeah, there is another question from Abina. No, says anyone.
So someone is commenting, so Solid is emerging standard.
Yes, that's the one from
Solid.
That's
Solid.
from Tom. Solid is an emerging standard designed to address some of the privacy problems.
He has given some links. I can send them.
There is another question. Do you want to answer?
Now, what it might be worthwhile doing is that I'll take the questions potentially offline.
Sure.
If that's okay. I'm just wary of time.
There are so many thanks.